The midday sun blazed through the windows of the Goldman Tower's executive dining room on the 48th floor of downtown Manhattan, illuminating the table where Victoria Preston sat reviewing market reports while her assistant confirmed lunch reservations. She barely glanced up when the waiter approached, a man in his late 30s wearing the standard server uniform that had seen better days, his name tag identifying him as David. Victoria had been holding court about her latest acquisition, explaining to her three junior executives how she'd leveraged a hostile takeover to gain controlling interest in a pharmaceutical company, when she noticed David standing nearby with water pitcher in hand. An idea struck her, the kind of impulsive demonstration of power that wealthy people sometimes use to prove they can make anyone dance to their tune. "You there, David," Victoria said, her voice carrying that particular authority that comes from never being told no. "You look like you're about 40. You must have some money saved. What do you invest in? Stocks? Bonds? I want to hear what regular people think about the market. This should be amusing." Her executive smiled, anticipating the entertainment of hearing an unsophisticated answer they could laugh about later. David set down the water pitcher with a careful precision that suggested he was considering his response. Victoria noticed his hands were steady despite her putting him on the spot, noticed his eyes were intelligent despite the worn uniform. Then he spoke in a voice that was quiet but carried an edge that made Victoria's smile falter slightly. "If you're genuinely asking for investment advice, I'd recommend you immediately divest your position in Meridian Pharmaceuticals. You acquired it yesterday for $42 per share thinking you got a bargain. But their phase 3 trial data on their flagship drug is about to fail FDA review in approximately 72 hours. When that news breaks, the stock will drop to $12 per share. You'll lose roughly $320 million based on your current position size, which I estimate at about 8 million shares given the volume spike yesterday and your typical acquisition patterns." The executive dining room went completely silent, except for the muted sounds of the city 48 floors below. If that opening just sent a chill down your spine, if you can already sense this is heading somewhere extraordinary, then hit that like button right now. Share this with everyone who's ever been underestimated because of their job title or their circumstances. Who knows that wisdom and expertise can exist anywhere if people bother to look past assumptions? Subscribe to Acts of Depth because we tell the stories about moments when power meets knowledge, when the disguise reveal themselves, when arrogance encounters the one person who actually knows what they're talking about. Now let me take you back to understand who both these people really were, because the collision that just happened between a billionaire CEO and a waiter wearing a name tag would reshape both their lives in ways neither could predict. Victoria Preston had built Preston Capital Management into a $12 billion hedge fund through aggressive trading strategies and a willingness to take risks that made other investors nervous. She'd started at 25 with money inherited from her grandfather, a Wall Street legend who'd made his fortune in the 1980s and had left Victoria both wealth and connections that opened doors most people never even saw. She was brilliant with numbers and ruthless with competition, had earned her MBA from Wharton and her reputation by consistently beating market returns through careful analysis and gut instinct that more often proved right than wrong. At 42 years old, Victoria had everything success was supposed to deliver. Penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, a car service that took her anywhere she needed, respect from competitors who feared her, and admiration from investors who'd gotten rich following her recommendations. She'd never married, had no children, had built her entire identity around being the smartest person in every room she entered. And she developed the particular arrogance that comes from a decade of being proven right more often than wrong, the assumption that her expertise and judgment were superior to everyone else's, especially people she considered beneath her station. The Meridian Pharmaceuticals acquisition had been her idea. She'd spotted the company's potential when their stock had dropped after a manufacturing facility caught fire. While other investors were fleeing, Victoria had seen opportunity. She'd spent 3 months building a position and then launched a hostile takeover that succeeded despite management's resistance. It was exactly the kind of bold move that had built her reputation and her fortune. So having a waiter tell her she was about to lose $300 million on that acquisition was both insulting and impossible, which is why Victoria's first response was to laugh. That's quite the imagination you have. What's your source for this inside information? A psychic hotline? Her executives laughed on cue. David didn't laugh. He met Victoria's eyes with an expression that suggested he'd been through this before. This dismissal, this assumption that his current circumstances negated everything he knew. My source is 20 years of pharmaceutical industry analysis, pattern recognition from observing how the FDA evaluates trial data, and the fact that I've seen Meridian's actual phase 3 results, which you apparently didn't access before making your acquisition. The trial showed only marginal improvement over placebo, with significant cardiac side effects that killed 2 patients. The FDA won't approve a drug that's both barely effective and potentially deadly. He paused. You bought the company based on the potential of a drug that will never reach market. In 72 hours, when the FDA rejection becomes public, you'll either need to sell at a massive loss or hold and pray they can develop something else worth the investment you've made. Neither option is good. Victoria's smile had disappeared completely. She pulled out her phone and opened her trading app, looking at her Meridian position. 8.2 million shares at $42 per share. Roughly $344 million invested. The largest single position in her fund. One of her executives, a young man named Marcus, spoke up nervously. Ms. Preston, should we verify this information? I can call our contact at the FDA. Victoria held up a hand to silence him, her eyes still on David. Who are you? And don't tell me you're just a waiter, because waiters don't know my typical acquisition patterns or my position sizes. David picked up the water pitcher he'd set down and refilled Victoria's glass with the kind of calm that suggested he was deciding how much truth to reveal. My name is David Chen. 10 years ago, I was running a hedge fund called Horizon Capital. We managed about $3 billion in assets and averaged 32% annual returns. I was very good at pattern recognition and pharmaceutical analysis specifically. Then my wife Sarah was diagnosed with ALS. I liquidated the fund to focus on her care and our daughter. Sarah died 18 months ago. I've been working as a waiter to support my daughter while I figure out what comes next. He set the pitcher down again. So yes, I'm currently a waiter, but I used to do exactly what you do, except I was better at it because I actually did the research before making 8-figure bets. The silence that followed was so complete that Victoria could hear her own heartbeat. She'd heard of Horizon Capital. Everyone in the industry had. David Chen had been a legend for his pharmaceutical picks, had somehow predicted which drugs would succeed and which would fail with almost supernatural accuracy. Then he disappeared from the market about a decade ago, and Victoria had assumed he'd retired or burned out or been one of the managers who'd failed spectacularly and quietly exited the industry. She'd never imagined he was serving water in the executive dining room where she regularly held court. Marcus was already on his phone pulling up information about Meridian's trial data. His face went pale as he read. Ms. Preston, he's right. There's a leaked memo on a medical research forum from 3 hours ago. Phase 3 trials showed 2 cardiac deaths and barely any improvement over placebo. The FDA review board meets Monday, and the consensus is rejection. Victoria felt her stomach drop. $344 million about to evaporate because she'd bought a company without doing deep enough due diligence, assuming her instinct was enough. And she'd nearly missed the warning because it came from a waiter she'd been condescending to as entertainment. She looked at David, really looked at him for the first time, saw the expensive watch on his wrist that didn't match his server uniform, noticed the way he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd been important once and knew they could be again. You could have let me lose that money. Why warn me? David shrugged. Because you asked for investment advice, and I don't believe in withholding information that could help someone even when they're being condescending. Also, $300 million represents a lot of investors who trusted you with their money. They don't deserve to lose it because you were too arrogant to do proper research. The criticism stung because it was accurate. Victoria made a decision that surprised everyone at the table, including herself. Marcus, start liquidating our Meridian position immediately. Quietly. Don't trigger a panic. David, sit down. She gestured to an empty chair. You're going to tell me everything else I'm doing wrong, and then we're going to discuss why someone with your expertise is serving water instead of managing money. David hesitated, then pulled out the chair and sat. Over the next 40 minutes, he proceeded to dismantle every major position in Victoria's portfolio, explaining which picks were solid and which were based on incomplete analysis. He pointed out a biotech company she'd missed that was about to announce breakthrough trial results. He identified a pharmaceutical consolidation that was going to create arbitrage opportunities. And he did it all from memory without needing to look at charts or reports because he'd been tracking the pharmaceutical industry for 20 years, and his expertise hadn't disappeared just because his circumstances had changed. Victoria's executives sat in stunned silence while their boss received a master class in investing from a man wearing a waiter's uniform. When David finished, Victoria had pages of notes and a completely different understanding of her current positions. "Why are you working here?" she asked. "With your track record, you could be at any major fund on Wall Street." David's expression shifted to something sadder. "Because when I liquidated Horizon Capital to care for Sarah, I told my investors I was closing the fund permanently. I gave them back their money with returns intact. But I also made a promise to Sarah that I'd prioritize our daughter Emma over everything else, including career. She's 8 now, and she needs a father who's present, not someone working 80-hour weeks to chase returns. Waiting tables gives me flexible hours and lets me be home when Emma needs me." He paused. "I've had offers to come back. Multiple funds have approached me, but I turned them all down because Emma already lost her mother. She's not losing her father to a career that consumed me before Sarah got sick." Victoria felt something unfamiliar, respect for someone making a choice she couldn't understand. "That's admirable but wasteful. You have expertise that could generate billions, and you're serving lunch to people who don't appreciate what you know. You appreciated it enough when it saved you $300 million, David pointed out. "And Emma appreciates having a father who shows up to her school plays and helps with homework and isn't constantly stressed about market movements. There are different kinds of wealth, Miss Preston. You've accumulated the financial kind. I'm trying to accumulate the kind that matters when you're watching your daughter grow up." The rebuke was gentle but clear. Victoria had spent 20 years building financial wealth and had nothing else to show for it. No relationships that weren't transactional. No family beyond distant relatives who tolerated her at holidays. No purpose beyond accumulating more money than she could spend in several lifetimes. She stood abruptly, pulling a business card from her wallet. "I want to hire you as a consultant, not full-time, not 80 hours a week. But your expertise is too valuable to waste on water pitchers. Name your hours. Name your rate. You can work from home. You can be present for Emma. But I need what you know." David took the card but didn't commit. "I'll think about it, but understand something. I don't need your money. I have enough saved from Horizon Capital to support Emma comfortably. What I need is time with my daughter. If consulting works within that framework, maybe. If it doesn't, I'm perfectly content serving water and being underestimated by people like you." He stood and picked up his water pitcher. "Your lunch will be out in 5 minutes. I recommend the salmon. It's fresh today." He walked away, leaving Victoria standing at her table with a business card in one hand and the humbling recognition that she'd just been schooled in both investing and priorities by a man she'd dismissed as entertainment. Marcus broke the silence first. "Did that actually just happen? Did a waiter just save us $300 million and then turn down a job offer?" Victoria sat down heavily. "He did, and he's not just a waiter. He's David Chen. I can't believe I didn't recognize him." She pulled up old articles about Horizon Capital on her phone, showing her executives the photos of David from a decade ago. Younger in expensive suits, photographed at industry events with the kind of confidence that came from being the best at what you did. The articles detailed his legendary track record and his mysterious disappearance from the industry. Now they knew why he'd disappeared and where he'd ended up. Victoria spent the rest of lunch distracted, barely tasting the salmon David had recommended. Her firm executed the Meridian liquidation over the following 24 hours, moving carefully to avoid triggering panic, but getting out before the FDA news broke. When the rejection announcement came on Monday morning, exactly as David had predicted, Meridian's stock crashed from 42 to $11 per share. Victoria had gotten out at an average of 39, taking a small loss instead of the catastrophic hit that would have resulted from holding. Her investors never knew how close they'd come to disaster or that a waiter had saved their money. Victoria went back to the Goldman Tower's executive dining room the following week, specifically requesting David's section. When he approached with menus, she handed him a contract instead. 2 days a week, 4 hours each. You pick the days and times around Emma's schedule, $50,000 per month. Your job is to review my portfolio and tell me what I'm missing. You can do it from your apartment if you want. No office required, no meetings unless you choose to attend them. Just your expertise on pharmaceutical and biotech positions. David read the contract without expression. This is more than generous. Why? Because you're right about different kinds of wealth. I have $12 billion and nobody who depends on me. You have Emma and time with her and purpose beyond accumulation. I can't buy what you have, but I can pay for what you know. And maybe learning from someone who got their priorities right will teach me something beyond market analysis. Victoria's voice had lost its usual arrogance. Also, you saved my investors $300 million. The consulting fee is a fraction of what that advice was worth. David folded the contract and put it in his pocket. I'll discuss it with Emma. If she's comfortable with me working from home while she's at school, then yes. If it interferes with her time with me, then no. She gets the deciding vote because she's already lost her mother. Her needs come first. Agreed, Victoria said. Let me know. David brought the contract back, signed 3 days later. Emma had apparently thought it was cool that her dad would be helping people make smart choices about money while still being home when she got off the school bus. The consulting arrangement began the following week. David would arrive at Victoria's office Tuesday and Thursday mornings, spend 4 hours reviewing positions and strategy, and then leave to be home when Emma's school day ended. He worked from his apartment the rest of the time, sending detailed analyses of pharmaceutical companies and biotech startups that Victoria's team could then investigate further. His track record proved as legendary as his reputation suggested. Over the next 6 months, David's recommendations added $800 million to the fund's value. He identified winning positions that Victoria's team had missed and prevented 3 catastrophic investments that would have resulted in significant losses. He did it all while maintaining his boundaries about time and availability, never working evenings or weekends, always prioritizing Emma's needs over market urgencies. Victoria found herself learning not just about investing, but about what a life balanced differently might look like. She met Emma once when David brought her to the office because of a school closure. The 8-year-old was bright and funny and clearly adored her father, who seemed completely different around his daughter than he did analyzing pharmaceutical trial data. Victoria saw the way David listened when Emma talked about her day, the way he knew her teachers' names and her friends' dramas, the way being her father seemed to matter more to him than anything else, including the considerable respect he commanded in investment circles. It made Victoria think about her own life and what she'd sacrificed to build her career, the relationships she'd never prioritized, the experiences she'd missed while working 80-hour weeks, the reality that she was 42 years old with billions of dollars and nobody who'd miss her if she disappeared tomorrow. One evening after David had left for the day and Victoria was alone in her office reviewing the returns his advice had generated, she pulled up photos from her own childhood. She'd had parents who were rarely present, who'd prioritized their own careers and social status over time with their daughter. She'd told herself she was different, but looking honestly at her life, Victoria realized she'd become exactly like them, successful and empty. The recognition that a waiter had wiser priorities than a billionaire stung, but it also created possibility for something different. Victoria started making changes, small ones at first, leaving the office by 7 instead of 9, taking Sundays completely off, volunteering at a youth financial literacy program where she taught teenagers about investing and found the work more satisfying than adding another million to her fund. She began building relationships that weren't purely transactional, including a tentative friendship with David that existed outside the consulting and talk about things beyond market strategies. David would tell stories about Emma and Sarah, about the life he'd built and lost and was rebuilding differently. Victoria would share her own recognition that success without meaning was just accumulation without purpose. A year after their first encounter, David invited Victoria to Emma's ninth birthday party. It was at a park with rented bounce houses and pizza and cake, attended by Emma's classmates and their parents. Victoria showed up feeling completely out of place among the families, but Emma introduced her as Daddy's friend who helps people make good choices about money, and the other parents welcomed her warmly. Victoria watched David interact with the other fathers, helping set up activities and joking with Emma's friends and being completely present in a way Victoria had never seen her own parents be. She felt something shift inside her, a recognition that this casual Saturday afternoon in a park meant more than most of the professional achievements she'd been chasing. After the party, while David was cleaning up, Victoria helped pack away decorations. "Thank you for inviting me. I haven't been to a child's birthday party in probably 30 years. "You looked uncomfortable at first," David observed, "but you were good with the kids. You explained how compound interest works to Emma's friend Jacob using candy as an example. That was excellent teaching." "I've been thinking about your advice differently lately," Victoria said. "Not the investment advice, though that's been profitable, but the advice about priorities and different kinds of wealth. I've been wondering what I'm building and whether it matters to anyone, including myself." David tied off a trash bag and looked at her. "The fact that you're asking the question is growth. A year ago, you wouldn't have cared. You were too busy proving you were the smartest person in every room. And you proved I wasn't when you saved me $300 million while serving water." Victoria smiled. "That was humbling but necessary. I'd confused wealth with wisdom. You taught me they're not the same thing." David nodded. "Wisdom is knowing what to sacrifice and what to protect. I sacrificed my career to protect time with Emma. You're starting to figure out what your version of that looks like. That's worth more than any return I could generate for your fund." Victoria made more changes. She reduced her active management role, delegating more to her team while focusing on strategic oversight. She started a foundation funding medical research for ALS, inspired by David's story about Sarah. She began dating someone she actually liked instead of someone who impressed business associates. And she discovered that stepping back from the relentless pursuit of more money actually made her better at her job because she could see opportunities more clearly when she wasn't consumed by the daily grind. The fund continued to grow, but Victoria's measure of success started shifting from purely returns to impact and meaning. 2 years after meeting David in that executive dining room, Victoria attended Emma's school play, where she was playing the lead in a production of Annie. David was in the front row recording on his phone with an expression of pure pride. Victoria sat beside him and watched this little girl who'd lost her mother shine on stage with the kind of resilience that came from having a father who'd made her his priority. After the play, Emma ran to David and asked if he'd seen how well she'd done. He'd assured her she was brilliant and that her mother would have been so proud. Then Emma had turned to Victoria and asked if she'd liked the performance too. Victoria found she had tears in her eyes answering yes, moved by the normalcy and love and simple joy of a father celebrating his daughter's achievement. David noticed the tears. "You okay?" "I'm thinking about what I would have missed if I'd never met you. Not the investing returns, though those are significant. But this, understanding that there are things worth more than money, that being present matters more than being powerful, that a man wearing a waiter's uniform can be richer than a billionaire if he's got his priorities straight." Victoria wiped her eyes. "You've taught me more than market analysis. You've taught me about life. Thank you." David smiled. "You were ready to learn. I just happened to be there when you asked the question. Even if you meant it as condescension at the time." 3 years after their first encounter, David decided to officially return to managing money, but not in the way he'd done before. He and Victoria partnered to create a new fund called Horizon Renewal that operated on principles both of them had learned from their unlikely friendship. The fund's managers worked reasonable hours. They prioritized sustainable returns over aggressive growth. They invested in companies developing treatments for diseases like ALS. And they proved that you could generate excellent returns while maintaining work-life balance and investing with conscience. David remained a devoted father who never missed Emma's events and who'd rebuilt a career on terms that served his priorities instead of consuming them. Victoria became a different kind of leader, someone who measured success by impact as much as returns, and who'd learned that wisdom could come from unexpected sources if you were humble enough to listen. And it all started because a billionaire CEO had condescended to ask a waiter for investment advice as entertainment. And the waiter had responded with expertise that saved her $300 million dollars and taught her that the most valuable assets aren't always the ones you can measure in dollars. If you stayed with this story to the end, you understand something crucial about assumptions, expertise, and the difference between wealth and wisdom. Victoria Preston had billions of dollars but was so certain of her own superiority that she nearly lost hundreds of millions through incomplete analysis. David Chen had a waiter's uniform and a daughter to raise, but retained expertise worth more than any consulting fee. When arrogance met knowledge, when assumption encountered truth, Victoria had a choice: dismiss the warning and lose everything, or humble herself enough to listen. She chose humility. And that choice didn't just save her money, it taught her that success without meaning is just accumulation. That people in any circumstances can possess wisdom worth hearing. That priorities matter more than profits if you want a life worth living. Share this with everyone who's been underestimated because of their current circumstances, who knows that expertise doesn't disappear when situations change, who needs to remember that the wisest person in the room might be the one nobody's paying attention to. Subscribe to Acts of Depth because we tell stories about moments when disguises fall away, when the powerful get schooled by the humble, when transformation happens because someone was brave enough to speak truth and someone else was wise enough to listen. The billionaire who forced a poor single dad to give investing advice got 72 hours warning about a $300 million disaster. But more importantly, she got a friendship with someone who taught her that being a present parent mattered more than being a legendary investor. David Chen gave up billions to raise his daughter. Victoria Preston learned from watching him that sacrifice for love creates wealth money can't buy. That lesson was worth more than any return. That wisdom changed both their lives. And it started with a waiter answering a condescending question with truth that froze a billionaire in her tracks and taught her that assumptions about people based on job titles are always dangerous, always wrong, and always costly if you're too arrogant to recognize expertise when it's standing in front of you holding a water pitcher.